What's up, KSP fans? It's dylloop, and welcome to the very first tutorial in a long series of tutorial that shows you the basics and advanced KSP mechanics. Today we will be covering basic rocket design that includes launching for your first time and what to do. Next we'll be covering intermediate rocket design, where we will cover how to get your mass to weight ratio along with action groups and some more advanced building techniques, followed by advanced rocket design, where we will be able to calculate delta V and even more advanced building techniques. For right now, we're just going to get started. This tutorial is mostly for beginners to KSP. I figured it would be a nice thing to do because KSP released on Steam. Also, this video will be posted to TGN Central, so if you're watching there, make sure to check out the description and check out my main channel. So the first thing you want to do is start a new game, and we're going to name this tutorial. Then, after you start the new game, you will come to this screen here. Now, there's several things you can do. This is the tracking station we will cover more of later. This is the spaceplane hangar, and that will have its own separate tutorials on how to build space planes and launch them. And then we've got the launch pad, which you can click and load rockets instead of having to go to the VAB. Last but not least, we have the VAB, or the Vehicle Assembly Building, which we will be working in today. So the first thing you want to do in here is select your cockpit. There's several types of cockpits. We've got the manned cockpits, which you could see by their minimum crew to operate and their maximum crew capacity. Down here it says minimum unmanned. So these are probe bodies that are very light and require electrical power to work. So today we're going to be covering manned and unmanned just in one tutorial, but we're going to start off with this command pod Mach 1. Now, when you place it down, it gets placed in the vehicle assembly building. You can right click with your mouse and drag to rotate, or you can hold shift and drag, or is it control? You can use shift and scroll to scroll in and out, or just scroll to go up and down, or shift. What am I doing? Oops. Okay. So yeah, those are the basics. You can click your object and move it around the screen to replace it. Next, we have a bunch of tabs here that have different parts. First off, we have propulsion, that has anything to do with rocket fuel or engines. Then we have control. This has to do with controlling your spacecraft and keeping it stable. Structural is purely either cosmetics or things that you can link to your rocket that won't affect the liftoff, but it will affect the mass. Aerodynamics is mostly for space planes, but is very useful for rockets that are unstable in the atmosphere. And utility is anything that has to do with batteries, parachutes, wheels, lights. Then these xenon containers, which I don't know why are not in propulsion. Science are these scientific instruments that'll tell you things that you could attach to probe bodies. We'll get more on all of this stuff later. For now, we want to go into our utilities panel and select a parachute. Now, the first stage of your rocket that you're building is going to be your lander design. This is different for orbital, or not for orbital, but for landing on other planets and moons, because you're going to have extra stages. But for right now, we're just launching straight up and down, so we need something that will return safely. That's why the parachute's there. It'll slow down the capsule enough to land safely. Next off, we are going to need a decoupler. These are in structural, and there's two different types of decouplers. You have the large stack decoupler, which are for 3 meter parts, and you have the small stack decoupler, which are for these 1 meter parts. We're going to go ahead and go with the 1 meter. Next off, we have our propulsion. We need something that can lift this thing off the ground. For now, we're going to go with the small solid rocket booster just to demonstrate what to do. Next off, we have our action groups. Most of the time, by default, these get set pretty nicely, depending on how you build your rocket. The 0 is the last one to launch, so it goes from top to bottom. Now, if you mouse over it, you can see that the solid rocket booster highlights with this one, the decoupler highlights with this one, and the parachute highlights with this one. So the first thing we want this rocket to do on launch is to launch. So we have it set to 2. Then once that's out, we have to decouple this, which is set to 1, and then we have to launch our parachute, which is set to 0. So let's go ahead and launch this guy and name it Tutorial Craft. Tutorial Craft. Next you hit this little save icon to save your craft, which you can load later. And you hit this little green button here to launch the spacecraft. Now you'll load into the launch pad. This may take a bit of time depending on how large your spacecraft is, or how slow your computer is, graphic settings, all that stuff. Alright, first thing you're going to want to do normally for bigger crafts and smaller crafts alike is to hit the T button. This will turn on and off your SAS. Alternatively, you can hit the F button and hold it to toggle SAS. So if you're holding it down, SAS will be active. If you're not, it'll be inactive. Or if you hold T and then press it, it'll deactivate it for a short time, which is good for turning. Next off, you have your RCS, which we will get into more later for orbital rendezvous, because that is mostly what it's used for, or orbital operations. Alright, so to launch your spacecraft, you're going to want to hit spacebar to activate the first stage. For solid rocket boosters, you don't have to worry about the throttle, but we will cover that in a second. So you hit spacebar and your rocket will instantly shoot up into the sky, or may just kind of tilt over, just not go anywhere, depending on how heavy the rocket is. That will be covered in the intermediate rocket tutorials on how to make sure that your rocket will be light enough, but also powerful enough to launch up into the air. Now over here we can see that we have solid fuel, and we have a bar that's going down. That's our fuel level. These solid rocket boosters will not, you cannot adjust the throttle. So if you have too many close together, they will overheat, which you also saw by the red bar. So they're just maximum thrust for a short amount of time. So now we can just kind of turn around. So now that we're done, we need to land safely on the planet of Kerbal. So we need to hit spacebar, and that'll decouple the solid rocket booster. And then hit space again, and it'll launch our parachute, which has a very strange texture at the moment. Maybe it's just because we're going up. Weird KSP bug. Alright, so now as you can see, we have a few more things that I haven't covered. We have our altimeter up here. It says we are 18,000 meters, or 18 kilometers up in the air and falling. Then we have our atmosphere. This shows how far in the atmosphere we are. There's several stages of the atmosphere, and that's different on each planet. This will be covered more in the orbital operations tutorial. Then we have our speed. Right now it says surface because we're not in orbit, and it says 220 meters a second, and as you can see up here we're going down, so that's 240 now meters per second towards the ground and not away from it. Again, I have no idea what's up with this parachute. This is a fresh KSP install, so it's got to be something funky. Let's hope it fixes a bit when we send to the ground. Now up here we have our time warp and our mission elapsed time. It says T plus 2 minutes and 2 seconds and just one play button. You can either click these play buttons to speed it up, which when you're in the atmosphere it's physical time warp, and in our orbital operations tutorial we will cover the other time warps. Alternatively, you could press the period and comma key to warp up and down, and this will show a little warning if you go past 2 times. So warping up and warping down. Parachutes open around 500 meters, so you don't want to be going faster than about 2 times when your parachutes open, otherwise they're likely to rip off. That was an explosion of the rocket engine. I have no idea what's up with this parachute. It's not see-through. That's weird. Of course, a weird thing like that has to be present in a tutorial. So now that we can just time warp and wait until we hit the ground. Again, you don't want to really hit the ground going time warp because the game can be a little finicky with it and explode your spacecraft. So right before we hit, we'll just go and time warp to 2 times, and then 1 time, and then touchdown. Alright, our flight is over. So now you hit escape and end flight, and it'll show you your mission flight events, and at 000 we have liftoff, and then 48 seconds we have separation of stage 2. The stack decoupler and the solid fuel booster both fell onto the surface at 3 minutes and 3 seconds. Alright, we're going back to the vehicle assembly building to cover some of the more advanced stuff, such as actual engines. So the first thing we're going to want is a fuel tank. Now there's many different types of fuel tanks in the game, and you may be overwhelmed at just how many there actually is. Did I already have that one? Yeah, I meant this one here. Yeah, there's a lot of different types of fuel tanks. There's jet fuel and monopropellant, RCS fuel. We're going to be covering all these slowly. The RCS will wait, but we're going to be covering the fuel first. Now, the 3-meter parts can be used with this little tiny cockpit, but most of the time they're used for the bigger ones. So for now, we're just going to go with this fuel tank, which is a medium-small, or as I like to call it. So there's 3 different types of small fuel tanks. There's the medium, the large, and the small. Nope, that's a large. Small. These all have the same mass to fuel holding for their size. So this one is half as big as this one in weight and fuel, and then this one is twice as big as this one in weight and fuel. So it doesn't matter which one you use. There's purely to use less parts in case your spaceship is lagging. Alright, next off we need to add a rocket engine. There's many types of rocket engines. We're going to be covering the 1-meter parts for now. These are the 3 different types of engines. This is a small landing engine. It has thrust vectoring. And then this is a liftoff engine that does not have thrust vectoring. And this one does. You can see all this stuff in the description of the part if you look right here. It says thrust vectoring enabled. I'm trying to find it. This one does not say it, but because it's not thrust vectoring, but this one here will say thrust vectoring enabled and vectoring range of 1.0. So we're just going to stick one of these vectoring engines on here. And why don't we switch this out with a bigger tank, just so it could last longer. Next off, we're going to cover some radial decouplers. Again, many types and many uses for these. Here is the 3 different types of decouplers that you can have. These are mostly for larger ships, so we're not going to be covering these, but the single one here is for smaller ships, so we will. This down here is the Symmetry Mode. We also have center of mass, center of lift, and center of thrust. This will all be covered in more advanced tutorials. We're going to go to 3 symmetry by clicking it. Alternatively, you can hit X and Shift X to go up and down. And we're going to click here. This is angle snap. If you turn this off, you can put the part anywhere you want, which is kind of it might be a good idea for certain things or bad for other things. But we're going to keep it on for now just to keep the rocket stable. Next off, we need some solid rocket boosters. Now let's use the big ones because I would like to cover a thing. Sometimes there's an issue connecting some of the bigger parts to these small things, to these small parts. All you really have to do is get it to connect in any place and then go back and then it'll connect to the decoupler. Now with these bigger fuel tanks and rocket engines, you're going to need separatrons. Separatrons are used for moving the part away from your object. Now there's a kind of a trick to placing these. If you, let's go back, it starts off like this and you could place it like that, but that's not going to do much good. It's just going to launch with the spacecraft. So you need to hit D to rotate it. A, S, W, and D, rotate parts. Alternatively, you can hit Control or Shift, to rotate them smoothly. So we're going to hit D, then we're going to hit Shift and A to rotate it, or Shift and D to rotate it up a bit. That way it'll fall down away from the craft. And we're just going to put these all symmetrical on all sides. Now for this side we need to hit A because it's opposite, it's mirrored. And just stick one up here as well. Now this may be an overuse of these guys, but too many is not always an issue. So there we go, we have all our separatrons. Now it'll put them all in a separate stage. You're going to want to do some advanced staging here. This is our decouple stage for our solid rocket boosters. So now we need to figure out what our separatrons are. We just drag them up. They are the set of 3s because I had 3 symmetry. And then we need to make sure that our solid rocket boosters are all in the first stage. We're going to have those fire first. Then as the separatrons release, or the stack decouplers release, we need the separatrons to fire. That's in our stage 3. Then we want our engine to fire in stage 2, and again decouple, and a parachute. So let's go ahead and save and launch, and go ahead and launch this thing. Alright, here we are at the launch pad Jebediah Kerman in the pilot seat. First thing first, we need to enable SAS, which this ship doesn't have any. In our next build, we will be covering the large stock parts, so we'll cover that in a second. Our first stage is only solid rocket boosters, but so you don't need to worry about the throttle. But just so I could cover it now instead of in flight, you use Control and Shift to adjust your throttle. That's the meter right here. As you can see, it moves up and down with Shift and Control. Also, if you have a joystick, you can use your throttle on there. We're going to hit space to launch the ship. And these will take a long while to burn out, only because they're very, very big solid rocket boosters. And again, you can see the solid fuel use down here, along with overheating if there is any. And there almost always is small overheating with these solid rocket boosters. Solid rocket boosters are very good if you just need a little push for the very first stage to get out of the first part of the atmosphere, but they can easily be overused as they have a very low mass to weight ratio, or thrust to weight ratio. Again, we'll be covering all that in the intermediate rocket design. These are about to burn out, and we will hit space once they do, which will launch our Separatrons away from our ship. Hit space again. Now the little stack decouplers, or radial decouplers as they are, leave these little things behind. Those aren't a big deal. I don't know if they weigh anything. So we're just firing this here. Now if we don't want to get too high because it'll take too long to fall down to the ground, we can easily just throttle down and then uncouple. Parachute, which hasn't opened yet because we aren't in the atmosphere enough. Now, while we're up here, it might be a good idea to explain the map mode. If you hit M, you can see your map. You may have to hit this arrow here to see your nav ball, which we will be covering again in some orbital maneuvers. If you're facing towards the brown, you're heading towards the ground. If you're facing towards the blue, you're heading up to the sky. And then you have your retrograde and prograde, which again we'll cover in some of our orbital stuff. This are apoaps. Cover that later. There's a lot of stuff we will cover later. For right now, it's just very beginners, which I'm sorry if you are more advanced to the game. Again, we have parachute, weird deploymentness going on. We're going to land in the ocean. You can spin your capsule. You move your capsule using the WASD, Q, and E to rotate, along with some more advanced controls for the RCS. Alright. We got parachute deployment, and we will safely fall to the ground. We've all seen that already, so let's end flight and go back to the vehicle assembly building. Now we're going to load, or start a new spacecraft, because we want to use some of these 3-meter parts. There's different parachutes for these 3-meter parts. You have radial parachutes, or these big ones. So you could use the 3-meter parachutes on 1-meter parts, or the radial on 1 meters, but that's not necessary. So we need, again, the large stack decoupler, which is in structural, and you stick that on. Now we need a new item, which is the advanced SAS, or the SAS module. The SAS module comes in a 1-meter part. There is no just regular SAS module in a 3-meter. So we're going to go ahead and use the 3-meter advanced SAS module, which will allow all of our ships to use its own thrust vectoring and winglets to keep itself steady. It does not really control the ship on its own. These SAS modules do. They control the rotation and of your ship using gyroscopic whatever. We're also going to need this RCS fuel tank, a jumbo fuel tank, and a jumbo rocket engine. Next, we will use our decouplers. You can use the standard 1-meter parts on these as well. It's just not necessary. So if we wanted to, we could put on the small little tiny solid boosters, or we could again use the big ones. I'm going to go ahead and do the small ones just because I don't think we'll need the thrust. But we may. Again, if it doesn't work, then that's just another reason for you to go watch the second tutorial. So these are our little rocket engines. These are small, so we're not going to need any decouplers on them, but we may need some winglets because it's a big rocket. So if you go into Aerodynamics and you get these AV R8 winglets and stick them on here on the 3 symmetry, your advanced SAS will automatically control them to keep your craft steady. We're also going to stick some here so when these decouple, so we have a little bit more advanced rocket ship. We're not forgetting anything. We go through the last checklist to make sure all the stages are properly done. So we have our solid boosters, our decouplers, our big mainsail engine, decouple, and parachute. Let's go ahead and name this big tutorial craft. Big tutorial craft. Save and launch. Now this is a long tutorial just for the basics. As you can see, we now have 3 pilots because this is a bigger cockpit that we are using. We have Bill, Jebediah, and Bob, which are the default Kerbals you get, but as they die you will get more, and they will come back as well. I'm thinking about covering the probe bodies in the intermediate or advanced tutorials, or even orbital operations tutorial, because that's mostly the reason for them. So first off, we hit SAS, and then space to launch. This does have enough thrust to get up, but off the ground, but barely. As you can see, unlike the other ones, we're just crawling up into space very slowly. But once we ignite that rocket engine. Now, you could also ignite engines by right-clicking on them and just clicking this little blue button, Activate Engine. So if we want to activate that engine without using our staging, we can easily do that and get a little bit more thrust. For now, we're just going to deactivate it. Release these boosters, which with the winglets, they're kind of scary. And then we're going to ignite the mainsail. Now, if you hit the WASD keys, you can see that the winglets are moving, but our SAS is holding us steady. If we wanted to, we could hold F and then hit our WASD keys, to rotate the craft, but we're not. So we hit F, get back up into the center dot, which is straight up in the air, and then hit T. Or we don't need to hit T because we're hitting F. This rocket's actually going fast enough to get atmospheric effects going up. Alright, we decouple. Get away from me. Hit our parachute, which actually has the texture properly now. I am not sure what was causing that little thing. I'll have to look into it before the next tutorial. As you can see, we're still going up even with the parachute deployed. It's slowing us down, but not very much. It's a very large parachute. So we will go ahead and physical time warp using our period and comma keys until we start falling towards the Earth. It's a very slow process, but this is the episode finale, so let's show you guys something. Let's show you guys what happens if you do forget parachutes. So if you totally forget parachutes, which I'm going to cut it off just to show, you will fall to the Earth. Right now I'm rotating the capsule on my own. You'll fall to the Earth with nothing to stop you and going lightning speed. The atmosphere will slow you down, but not enough to save your lives. It's wanting to head down just because it's a little top heavy with the parachute, so it doesn't want to cooperate. Alright, we're coming down, and boom. Kerbals are dead. There was nothing we could do to save them except for not cut the parachute. So yeah, make sure to get parachutes on the spacecraft. Now this is the end for episode 1, or tutorial 1. Next episode we will be covering some more intermediate rocket design, how to calculate your thrust to mass ratio, and some advanced staging techniques such as asparagus staging and just dropping your payloads at the right time. After that, again, we will be covering advanced rocket tutorial. We'll also do orbital operations, docking, landing on the moon, landing on Minmus, and landing on other planets. Now if you scroll out in the map mode, you can see that we have a moon. We also have another moon. It's called Minimus. It's kind of inclined. If you scroll out even farther than that, you can see that we have other planets and a sun, and each of these planets, I don't want to restart flight, each of these planets, which if I focus on Duna by double clicking it, some of them have their own moons on their own, so you could actually travel to many different bodies in the Kerbal system. We'll have tutorials on how to get to, I'm not sure if we will have tutorial on how to get to every single one, but we will have a tutorial on how to get to at least a few of them, and including moons. So thank you for watching. If you're from TGN, please make sure to subscribe and check out the game if you like it. It is on Steam. And if you are already subscribed, make sure to check out down in the description for my Twitch channel, where I will be streaming at least weekly, sometimes more, of KSP. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.